Does freedom have any limit? And if so, how do we find those limits? Check it out.
How do we determine what those limits are? And I think there needs to be a broad discussion, and it can't be just left up to the courts, and it can't just be left up to the legislatures. So when you're looking at freedom of speech, Oliver Wendell Holmes famously, who is a jurist down at in the United States Supreme Court, famously wrote, you can't just scream fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire, and you're just creating fear, and that people are going to be trampled as they try to get out, just because you want to have freedom of speech. So there have to be limits, of course. But there's an echo chamber when all of the major institutions have the same ideological position, and we're not allowing any freedom of speech. Our freedom is not because of the charter. Our freedom exists, and this is something that we have lost sight of. Like, I think a lot of young people today who are going through law school and going through university, they think the world began in 1982 when the charter came into law. No, it didn't. Our law goes back thousands of years.
Concepts with Shawn Whatley.
Welcome to Concepts. My name is Shawn Whatley, and today we have Barry Bussey with us. He's a lawyer who's well known in the freedom community and in conservative circles. He's the founder and president of the First Freedoms Foundation, and we had a long discussion about that. He's written academic pieces, many op-eds, and a number of books, including a popular book that was just published in 2023 on the Freedom Convoy, and we discussed that at the end of our conversation. Our talk today focused mostly on what does freedom mean? What are the limits of freedom? Who gets to choose our freedoms? Do the courts decide what is allowable in society, or should that be the role of parliaments and people in discussion? Is there a way to recover some of the freedoms that are necessary for a high-functioning society? Barry has spent decades thinking about the role of freedom, the necessity of freedom, and his own organization, First Freedoms, focuses specifically on that particular issue. So I found this discussion extremely helpful. We do get into some of the deeper issues around the philosophy of law and different approaches to law, but I think it's important that we pay attention to these and know what they are so that we can assess what's being thrown at us by government or by parliament or by the courts and the decisions that they make. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you find this as useful as I did. I really learned something every time I talk with Barry. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and also consider becoming a Patreon member. It'll really help the show. So let's get on with it. Barry Bussey, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Shawn. Great to be with you.
I appreciate you making the time. I have a whole bunch of things we want to talk about. We want to talk about your foundation. We want to talk about your book. We want to talk about the things that you're talking on your podcast right now. But I wanted to start with the organization you created. It's called First Freedoms Foundation. Just tell us about that, why you started it, and what's it all about.
Well, I tell you, it began with the 21 election when Prime Minister Trudeau was going around and creating an us and them between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. His push to take away charitable status or, of pro-life groups, that kind of thing. And I just felt like, my word, what's going on here? And I decided to be involved in doing, more critical writing in my op-eds on what's happening. And so I was working as in-house counsel for a Christian charity at the time, and I felt, if I'm going to become more and more critical of the government, I probably shouldn't be involved with this charity because, the whole political issues that charities need to avoid. And, you can deal with issues, but when certain issues kind of line up against one particular political movement or party, you're seen as partisan. And so anyhow, I wanted to avoid all that. And so I ended up resigning. And eventually what happened was I started up First Freedoms Foundation. We got the term First Freedoms from a 1953 Supreme Court of Canada decision in which Justice Ivan Rand, who was very much involved actually at the United Nations in his career. He was one of the, I think he probably was the deciding vote to recognize Israel as a country. I mean, he represented Canada, but nevertheless, he was part of that process. And in that decision, which involved the Jehovah's Witnesses who were being persecuted because of their, anti-Catholic opinions in Quebec and so on. And anyhow, the justice he ran, he pointed out and he talked about, the whole idea of freedom of speech and so forth. And he referred to original freedoms. And those original freedoms were freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and inviolability of the person. And so when we were talking about, okay, so what will we call this organization that we're wanting to start? It was actually my wife who said, well, why not call it First Freedoms? Because we didn't want to say Original Freedoms Foundation. It just didn't have that same pizzazz, as it were. But so anyhow, we went with First Freedoms Foundation. And so that's what we've done. And then, so, ideally, I suppose we should be a charity and try to, give receipts to people and all that kind of stuff. But that, we just didn't have the infrastructure for that. And also, we felt that with the same issue that I had being a member of or working for a charity, we felt, well, you know what? We need to have enough room, enough wide berth to be able to discuss issues, because we're a nonpartisan group. But the thing is, we don't want to be penned in. If we need to speak out against whoever's in power, it doesn't matter. Conservative, NDP, Liberal, it doesn't matter. But we want to be able to do that and not have to worry about, losing charitable status and all that kind of stuff. And so we kind of maintain our nonprofit status. Ultimately, I think we would like to get more involved in maybe some litigation down the road. I mean, we do a little bit, but not a lot. And because litigation is very expensive, and trying to get people to donate to a group that doesn't give a charitable receipt for that kind of thing is just, it's hard to raise funds. So another area that I'm tending to more towards, I suppose, my greater strength would be in the academic world. I think as time goes on, we'll probably get involved more with academic writing and dealing with those three first freedoms. And that's probably where we'll be. And anyhow, as a result of the convoy, which, the Freedom Convoy in 2022, I mean, all of a sudden, man, we started in November of 21. And then when the convoy started in January, it was like, everyone is talking about freedom now. And suddenly we had a really strong support base. I mean, people were giving us money, and I was like, man, why didn't I do this before? But when the Emergencies Act came in, everything dried up because people were frightened to death to give because they would be traceable, by government. And maybe, First Freedoms could be one of those horrible organizations that's standing up for freedom that the government doesn't like. And so people just stopped giving. And it was a real, it was a real game changer for us. So anyhow, I continued working with First Freedoms throughout the 2022 year, and recognized that, it's called a nonprofit for a reason. And, you're not making money at this at all, period. It was the first time I think I've gone through a year without any income on my income tax return since I was a teenager, or even before I was a teenager. Because when I was in my early teens and pre-teens, I was working at something. So anyhow, then a friend of mine said, hey, Barry, he'd been after me for a long time, and, about the whole idea about buying his practice. And so that kind of fit the bill. And so now I'm into private practice, where I do a lot of real estate, do a lot of wills and estates, but I also do a lot of charity work. So I do, because of my many years in the charity field, I do a lot of work for churches, nonprofits, that kind of stuff. I do a little bit of litigation as it involves all of that. Yeah, and so then on the side, I'm still, working on First Freedoms. I usually spend my weekends working on First Freedoms, doing interviews, writing op-eds if I can get the time to do it, and just kind of, centering on those three major focus points and just see where it goes. And I think, it's interesting because just before Christmas, I got a really, I'll say, a very heartwarming call from a fan of First Freedoms Foundation, and they gave us a very sizable donation so that I'm probably going to be able to get some extra help for 2026 as a result. And so that is something I'm really excited about. And it's like, okay, you know what? I think we're onto something. If people are willing to give that kind of money, then, hey, you know what? I want to be able to be there and make sure that I fulfill my duty and responsibility to keep it going.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that. No, it's fascinating to hear about donations. There's a whole discussion we could have there. It seems like if you have certain topics, then there's actually quite a bit of funds available.
Yes.
Whether it's business development or freedom for enterprise and stuff like that, and justifiably so. It makes sense, right? You have businesses willing to support that, but you're talking about academia and fighting for first freedoms, and who's going to even understand a lot of the stuff that you're talking about? Well, I'm glad you broke it down into those three freedoms, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. You have freedoms, plural. And just before we get to your book, which I have here about the truckers' convoy, have you turned your mind to the idea of freedom itself? Now, you have said you have three particular freedoms you're talking about. Are those freedoms an end in themselves? So we just want freedom of speech no matter what? Or are they a means to some other end? Freedom of religion, freedom, inviolability, I can't even pronounce the word, of the person. So have you thought about means versus ends? Because when you get to the trucker convoy discussion, some of the criticisms I've heard of it were that people were calling for freedom as an end in itself. And famously, Edmund Burke said, well, freedom, you got to tell me what kind of freedom you're talking about. Are we talking about freedom for a highwayman or a freedom for somebody who just escaped from prison? Is that the kind of freedom we're going to celebrate, or is it something else? So hopefully I've rambled enough to give you a chance to formulate an answer to that.
Well, one of my, in a lot of my academic writing, I will often talk about the idea of having freedom so that we have a maximum amount of freedom and yet still maintain civil peace, or words to that effect. And the problem is that, like even in our charter, which, by the way, was quite fascinating. When I first went to law school, I had a law professor, Ian Hunter, very good professor, by the way, very engaging, and wrote the biography, or a biography, on Malcolm Muggeridge, who is a British journalist and an individual who was really interested in concepts of freedom and all the rest. But anyhow, Ian, in his class, he was talking about, it was on civil rights, and he was talking about how the charter is really a problem because it has given way too much power to judges. And of course, that's what happens in the section 1 of the charter, where it says that, we all have these fundamental freedoms subject to reasonable limits, as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. And so right in the charter itself, there is this notion that, you can have freedom, but that freedom is not absolute. There has to be reasonable limits. The problem is, who gets to decide those limits? Judges are the ones who decide it, which I think is a real problem, in the sense that we have not gotten to the place where, like, there has been discussion in the academic literature about a dialogue between the courts and the state and the legislatures. A number of lawyers, or I should say law professors, have made that argument. The problem I find, at least when you look at it, there is not a whole lot of dialogue going on, because what will happen is when a court makes a decision, the legislature just goes ahead and accepts it. And we see that, for example, in during the Justin Trudeau government, when a lower court judge made a decision with respect to continuing euthanasia, or MAiD, for mental handicap, they just went full bore on that and not allowed it to work its way through the court system up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court, back in the Carter decision, said that, well, no, it can't be just because you have a mental condition. You've got to be able to decide whether or not to have MAiD. And so there is this mindset that, well, when a court says it, when a judge says something, even if it's a lower court, we're going to accept it, and the legislature just goes ahead and tries to fulfill what a particular judge said. And that's an extraordinary weight put on one judge in a lower court when we haven't had really ample opportunity to be able to publicly debate these issues. And so when it comes to freedom, yes, there has to be limits, but how do we determine what those limits are? And I think there needs to be a broad discussion, and it can't be just left up to the courts, and it can't just be left up to the legislatures. It's got to be involving the academic world, but not only the academic world. And I think just the average Canadian, the average person who, filled with the common sense that life experience gives us, need to be engaged in these conversations. And so when you're looking at freedom of speech, Oliver Wendell Holmes, famously, who is a jurist down in the United States Supreme Court, famously wrote, you can't just scream fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire, and you're just creating fear, and the people are going to be trampled as they try to get out, just because you want to have freedom of speech. So there have to be limits, of course. But the problem is who gets to set those limits. And currently, right now, under the Mark Carney government, we're having, Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, where there's, okay, so who gets to determine hate? Who gets to determine harm? And already, the Supreme Court in the Whatcott decision has defined hate, and yet under the Bill C-9, they're going to lower the threshold. So lower the threshold of hate. So that means there's going to be an expansive interpretation of hate when the new law comes into effect. Now it'll have, excuse me. Now it'll have to, work its way through the courts as to what the courts say about the act when it comes to law. But, there's so many complex layers, right? Because who gets to appoint the judges? Well, currently, for the last 10 plus years or so, it's a one particular ideological position on the political left that has been appointing the judges. Does that have an effect on the kind of decisions that are being made? Absolutely. And we've seen it. And there's a lot of literature discussing those kinds of issues. And so then is it really fair to say, okay, well, judges have a chance to say, but then when the judges are appointed by a particular mindset within government, like the famous perfect example of what I'm talking about was when Justin Trudeau was wanting to, or at least, Chief Justice McLaughlin was retiring. Who would be the new Chief Justice? And so Jody Wilson-Raybould suggested Justice Joyal out of Manitoba, but Mr. Trudeau was like, well, no, because I think he's going to be, not supportive of his particular ideology. And so ultimately that got rejected. So right there in that debate, which, Jody Wilson-Raybould talks about in her book and so forth, the point is that this is a real thing. It's not just conspiracy theorists or anything like this. There's lots of academic literature on, it's just natural that that whoever's in power gets to decide who's going to be the judges. So then basically what happens is we're creating echo chambers. So we've got echo chambers, and I can go a long spiel about the influence of law schools on the Supreme Court of Canada, for example, which is extraordinary. But there's an echo chamber when all of the major institutions have the same ideological position, and we're not allowing any freedom of speech. And so then hate and the freedom, so your freedom of speech gets limited because we've got a particular accepted narrative. And it's that the narrative, we see it in the media, we see it in public institutions like universities and so on. I mean, just like, another example is, the Trinity Western University Law School case involving, a private Christian university wanted to have a law school. And everyone was up in arms. But all of the institutions, whether it was the law societies, the media, the government, and so on, including the courts, ultimately at the Supreme Court, some of the courts, which is quite fascinating, including the BC court, the Nova Scotia courts, were all in favor of allowing free thought and allowing a private Christian university to have a law school, fully supported in the courts in Nova Scotia, fully supported in the courts in British Columbia, but Ontario was against it. And of course, Ontario is kind of like the engine of the country in so many things. And then that was it. The Supreme Court of Canada went right along with the Ontario arguments, totally rejected its own precedent of 2001, which dealt with the College of Teachers. And so there you have it. So you got, who gets to decide these limits? And go ahead.
No, I'm
I
getting
can keep on going.
No, I'm getting too excited here. I had to raise my hand to jump in and say something. So you mentioned Ontario, and you mentioned earlier you said demonstrably justified. That's sort of the language within the charter that says, oh no, the judges can actually rule against your freedoms and your rights as you think they're there in the charter, but the judge can say, no, you don't have that right today. And so the case that I'm most familiar with is the conscience case brought by the CMDS and the Catholic Association in Ontario, a charter challenge saying that forcing doctors to refer for euthanasia, medical assistance in dying, but it's euthanasia, it's voluntary active euthanasia, is an infringement against their conscience rights and their rights for freedom of religion. So freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, two separate freedoms within the charter. And the judge agreed. The judge said, yes, we are infringing on your rights. Your rights are being infringed upon, but it's demonstrably justified. So even though, we had the same arguments regarding abortion, and there's been no trouble accessing abortion in Ontario, even though people haven't been forced to refer for abortion. Now, a few decades later, no, we have to force those doctors to refer. And so this brings me to my question about the charter itself. It seems to me that we've been having this discussion a fair bit in conservative circles for the last few months about how Pierre Elliott Trudeau really constitutionalized his vision of the world by bringing the charter. And I see the charter as not a conservative document at all. And yet we have conservatives, certainly during the trucker rally, where we're going to get to in a minute, saying, these are my charter rights. And I'm thinking, guys, the charter is not your friend. The charter is an example of Napoleonic law or European continental law, where you just come up with grand ideas, which sound wonderful, rights of man, but really they don't mean anything because the exceptions are determined by someone else. So I wonder if you could just dilate a little bit on the difference between, let's say, a common law approach, which at least my understanding of our Constitution, the English Constitution, is we develop ideas based on precedent. Ryan Elford uses the term a disputational nature of truth. He said
Yes,
through
absolutely.
dispute, you finally arrive at, okay, this seems like a good way to go, versus a Napoleonic approach where Napoleon says, I think this is the truth. And so he's supreme. He's the Caesar if he gets to determine the exception. So tell me if I've got that wrong. And ultimately, what should conservatives think when they look at the charter? Should we start having parades about tearing down the charter, perhaps? I don't know. Go ahead.
I think we just need to, within the charter, you remember that in 1982, or during the conferences for the charter, the constitutional conferences, the only way the charter came into being is because of Section 33, which is the notwithstanding clause. And that was meant as a check against the runaway judges. And now here we have the current government is involved in a case whereby they are saying, well, it's unconstitutional to have the constitutional Section 33 being applied. I mean, it's just like, of course it is. What they're saying is that it goes against the spirit of the charter, and they use this concept called charter values, and it's not a constitutional term, although it's now becoming constitutionalized in the sense in the Trinity Western case, where the Supreme Court said, "Oh, this is an important charter doctrine or constitutional doctrine for interpretation," and it's like, no, it's not. I mean, I've written some articles on that very point. So the thing is that if we would use the charter as it is written, we can get along with it, even as conservatives, I think. I think because that Section 33 is kind of like a safety valve, and it's only there because of the conservative governments at the time, Peter Lougheed and so on, who insisted that the legislature should have the final say. And even then, it is a limitation on the legislature, because when a legislature says, okay, notwithstanding the right, we're going to have this law, it's only limited to 5 years, and then they have to pass it again for another 5 years. So built within it, there is this check and balance against the legislature, but there's no check on the government, on the judges. And so that's the problem here is we've got the problem. Well, there's a number of problems. One problem is that legislatures just accept whatever the judges say.
Exactly.
And that is a issue of politics. They do not have the fortitude to stand up for the principle for which they were elected on.
Yep.
Because they say, well, no, the court made me do it. And to me, that's an easy cop-out.
I'm getting too excited here. I'm cutting you off again.
No,
so this is where I was going to say, we get all excited about Section 33. Oh, the court, the Parliament can say, notwithstanding, they never do. B,
Rarely.
they rarely, yeah. Maybe it's becoming slightly more common, but overall, Parliament tends to abrogate its decision-making authority, not just to the courts, but to the executive branch, to all the staffers and experts who give them. So that's my core worry. If you allow the exceptions to be decided by a couple of unelected judges, where are we at when it comes to constitutional freedoms?
Well, we are very limited. And this was one of the points that Ian Hunter said many years ago when 30-odd years ago when I was in law school, that, when the common law was a very gradual approach to change in the law.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're at a point where you put an activist judge on the bench, the activist judge can make a decision, boom, and it totally changes. It could be hundreds of years of law can be changed just by a decision. The common law practice was never that way. You would always nip at the edge, but you would never just do wholesale change in the same way that we got right now under the Charter. And so our freedoms, and here's another thing too, our freedom is not because of the Charter. Our freedom exists, and this is something that we have lost sight of. Like, I think a lot of young people today who are going through law school and going through university, they think the world began in 1982 when the Charter came into law. No, it didn't. Our law goes back thousands of years. It doesn't go back just hundreds of years. It goes back thousands of years because we inherited the law from the United Kingdom. Yeah. And that law is old. And it's the common law tradition. And it's the various principles. Just think about it for a minute. There is no constitutional provision for the office of Prime Minister. None, not mentioned. Prime Minister's not mentioned. And yet we have the Prime Minister, and he's exercising absolute executive power. Now, I say that, of course, there are some checks and balances on it, but nevertheless, the Prime Minister is a very, very powerful office. And yet we've got no constitutional guardrails at all with respect to that office. And so the point is that we recognize that there are things that exist that are not written in the Constitution. Now, my point then is that our rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, our, inviolability of the person, the, freedom of expression, which is a derivative of freedom of speech, and so on. All of these various rights are rights that were developed over thousands of years in law, but they exist even prior to that. They exist because we're human beings. Mm-hmm. Human beings. In our philosophical understanding, if you look back at our history of philosophy, where you go back to Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, the concept of the human being having the ability to speak. That's why the trial of Socrates, written by Plato, is so powerful today. It was that's thousands of years ago. That story is still rings in the back of our minds in our civilization. And then you get the added layer, which goes back even further on the whole religious philosophical idea. How do we speak and determine truth vis-a-vis man and God? That is, the ability to be able to speak and say, well, here's what I think, or here's what the scripture says, and this is what I think it says. This was the whole point of the Protestant Revolution, the Enlightenment, and all the rest. So we've got a lot of history that recognizes that as a human being, in the theological side, we talk about the idea of the imago Dei, right? The image of God in the person, in the individual. Well, that has a religious component, but it also has a political or a social component. And that is, you cannot, this is where the inviolability of the person that Justice Ivan Rand refers to. It's because of that imago Dei in the philosophical sense that we have a common law principle of inviolability of the person. The person walking down the street cannot just be taken up by some government actor, put into the back of a car and put in jail. Can't do it. Why? Because of the inviolability of the person. There is something about the individual that must be given the right to be heard so that they can have a defense as to why they're being charged or why they're being taken captive, why they're being arrested. And so we have lost that history. We have lost that understanding of history, that it's not dependent upon the Charter. It's because we're a human being. And this becomes even more, I think, important given the rise of AI and artificial intelligence, of what that's going to do vis-a-vis us as human beings. I heard recently a discussion about whether or not a robot is going to be somehow given some kind of a charter of rights, like down the road, I'm like, yeah, I mean, like there is something, I don't care what man creates, but man is man. Like in man, I don't mean it in just like a one gender. I'm talking about, the humankind is unique. It has always been recognized. We've always been recognized as unique. And so that's why the freedoms are so important to understand, that the charter in and of itself is not the guarantee. So you're right. When the convoy, yes, they were saying, well, what is the purpose of the charter and all the rest of it? They had some good questions, but the problem is that people don't truly understand exactly what the charter is and how it works.
Yeah. Bruce Pardy wrote about it beautifully in his little book called Ecologic. He describes legal instrumentalism and how our parliaments now, our legislators, use the law as a tool to solve social problems. And I use the example all the time. It's like assuming that you could improve the service at your local Tim Hortons shop by passing a law. So it's as though the management at Tim Hortons say, well, Premier Doug Ford, can you guys please get a bit of legislation together that gives us more coffee options? But this issue of legal instrumentalism and administrative law, I think of Hamburger's book, is administrative law lawful, versus the common law approach.
Okay,
so do I have that right?
Yep. So here's the thing. One of the problems we have as well is that while the courts have gained more and more power in our society, and by the way, we've got to start asking ourselves, is it working for us? Is it working for us? Is it working for us that in the Carter decision, which decided euthanasia was going to be legal, when we see this absolute rampant numbers of euthanasia being performed in Canada, and really it is euthanasia. It's not medical assistance in dying. It's actually the medical profession is actually doing the killing, which is very different from what's being done down in California, where you have to personally, you've got to push the button. So, and in the Carter decision, the courts made reference to the fact, because part of the argument against the government legalizing this was that if you look at the examples over in Europe, things kind of spiraled out of control in Netherlands and Belgium and so forth. And the court said, well, no, I mean, that's in Belgium. That's not going to be a problem here in Canada because we're so much more, it's a different organization. Basically a kind of a, do I dare say, a kind of an arrogant approach to say, well, you know what? We're not going to fall like they fell because we're so much better, or at least, that's putting it in a very colloquial way. And look at what's happened. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, as it were. So, anyhow, I want to get back to your original question. What was it again? The
legal instrumentalism and versus common law.
Yes. Okay. So now here's what's happening. So on the one hand, you have a judge who judges make these decisions, has huge impact. And yet, what is also very fascinating is that the courts have been giving their role to supervise the implementation and implementation of the charter and protecting charter rights to the executive power of government. So that means, and now when we talk about executive power in Canada, we're talking about the Prime Minister's office, the government cabinet, right? So the Governor General and Council, right? It's the cabinet, but even below that, it's the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracies are making decisions that the courts say they are the experts, and that as experts, we rely on them to ensure that the charter is not being violated. Or if it is being there is a limit, a reasonable limit, we will let the experts decide whether it's reasonable or not. So in a very funny way, not funny in a very dark way, it's the courts have now been handing it more and more power to the executive, basically the bureaucrats. And we saw that in loads during the whole COVID experience, COVID-19 pandemic. I really think it's a COVID-19 panic, but anyhow, as some authors have written about. But the point is that what that has done then, rather than having an overseer protecting us, we're now having a bureaucracy. Now, the bureaucracy is faceless because they hide behind committees, they hide behind groups. So we don't really necessarily see them. We see the effects of their policies when they were applied, for example, at the border crossings or whatever, the tax collectors and all of that kind of stuff. But the policy decisions that are made in behind the scenes, and they come up with one of the problems that I've seen, for example, I guess I'm kind of segueing into the—
That's perfect. Yeah.
The Emergencies Act, right? Yeah, there you go. Is that the Prime Minister, from the very beginning of the COVID that COVID panic, that COVID pandemic, was the fact that he said that he wanted to bring in the Emergencies Act in order to enforce it. That this was something he like early months on, he wanted to bring in the Emergencies Act. Well, it was pretty much well known within the bureaucracy that was the Prime Minister's position. And then when the convoy started, it seems now very clear that, there was a lot of discussion about, bringing in the Emergencies Act to end the convoy and the protesters and all the rest of it, to end that demonstration. The Department of Justice, I'm not sure if it was Justice or if it was the Prime Minister's office working with Justice and so on. Anyhow, they prepared a brief to explain as to why they had the legal authority to implement the act and, to end the protest. We have yet to see that brief. Now, this is extremely important because it fits right in with what we've been talking about. And that is this: if we have a constitution that is supposed to be protecting us, we would normally think that those who are implementing various laws would be doing their best in ensuring that whatever policy they come up with is going to be compliant with the Constitution. And the courts have basically given government that kind of leeway. But when we have a situation where that legal opinion, that legal brief given to the Prime Minister's office to go ahead with the Emergencies Act is not made public, that raises huge suspicions for me. Because then we are saying, and here's what my fear is. My fear is that we're living at a time when the executive, with the all power that it's been given by the courts, is actively seeking to go outside of the Constitution to implement their own policies for whatever political reason it is. And that, to me, is a serious problem that we have in this country, when they're skirting the Constitution to get to the political end that they want, and they will do it notwithstanding the law itself. And so then, and here's the same crowd that are in court right now fighting against the Section 33. It's just mind-boggling.
I've held your book up a few times on the screen, and we are essentially talking about your book, but I want to officially introduce it. But as you're talking about the executive branch, I find more work has already been done on the American side with respect to researching and writing about this. They call it the administrative state, or at least that's Marini's book. But I thought as you were talking, I'm not coming to the defense of the executive, but I wanted to offer a practical example of how this works. So if you're in an organization, you'll have the board of directors. Often the board of directors, in some cases, they're elected, but nowadays they're more often appointed, or, a skills-based board, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But the board will think that they have control. And it's very often, and I've been in both positions. I've been on the executive side and also on the board side. The board feels the fiduciary responsibility for the organization. So we're thinking of Parliament, these elected people. They feel that they have ultimate responsibility. But then when I've worked on the executive side too, I've very often felt, even myself, that, those board directors, what do they know? They don't know anything. We're just going to get done what we need to get done, because those losers, they're only there for a term or 2 terms, and then they're going to be gone anyways. We really don't need to listen to them. And when you're dealing with an executive that's been in place for 10, 15, 20 years, maybe they're career executives, career civil servants, they're very bright and very expert at getting done what they want to get done, regardless of who sits in the board chair, regardless of who sits in the CEO position. And so we talk about this as though it's something evil and nefarious, and I suppose it is, and it can be, but really I think it's just human. This is how humans
no
work.
question. Yep.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd throw that in there. But I want to officially, can I just read the title
Sure,
of your book?
absolutely. Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
So 210 degrees Celsius, 16 ways the truckers ignited Canada for the long haul. And you published this, is this 2023?
Yeah, 23, November.
Yeah,
2023.
2023.
Yeah.
So really fun book. People need to go out and buy that book. And so now I cut you off again. So say what you're going to say and talk about your book. And over the next 10 minutes, we'll land this program
sure.
with those comments.
Yeah, well, what you just raised is just so key, because I see it not only in government, I see it in other large organizations, whether it's corporations, whether it's churches, church denominations, where I have had a lot of experience in. And we get the same kind of mentality. I call it the fortress mentality. The idea is that if someone attacks the fortress, whether it's a church, whether it's a government, whether it's a municipality, whatever, they bring up the drawbridge and then they fight. And there's no much in the way of communication or whatever. They're going to do their thing. And if you want to sue them, go ahead, sue them, that kind of a mindset. And so I think that's what's happening. And I think one of the, you mentioned about the American experience. One of the things that's, I think, really key is that in America, in the United States, there was always this tragic view of humanity. The idea that, it's kind of like Thomas Sowell's idea of tragic view of humanity. It's the idea that basically we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to have some kind of structure or guardrails to protect us from ourselves, in the sense of, people who are in authority we have to assume that they will abuse authority if they're given the chance. They may not want to when they come in first, and they've got lots of high ideals, but it's just the nature of the office. That I think is evident in all kinds of organizations. It's humanity. Okay, so the book. Yeah, the book. When this whole thing happened, I was kind of like, what on earth is going on? Like, I fully was sympathetic, I should say, towards the idea that, okay, government is imposing vaccine mandates on truckers who are primarily isolated individuals anyhow, when they're driving on the road and they're going back and forth to the United States and all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, is that even necessary? And then, but it represented more than that. It seemed to me it represented the whole idea of government imposing mandates on people and restricting their freedom. And yet there was not much in the way of evidence that would convince the public at large that this was absolutely necessary. It was just, you do what I say and that's it. And what also, of course, was fascinating, as we look back at it, is how all of the various government institutions, the media, and everyone, were all on the same page. And then you've got these people, and they are the salt of the earth people. They are the workers. They are they are not the ones with the PhDs and all of this, but they are going, first time in their lives for many of them, they're going to Ottawa and they're going to protest. So I decided I would go and just observe and just walk the streets, talk to people. Now, granted, it wasn't a lot of time. I mean, I was over there over 2 weekends.
My family went too.
Is that right?
2 weekends. Yeah. I didn't make it there. I wanted to go, but yeah, they went.
Yeah.
Freezing cold. I think it was minus 30 that weekend or something.
It was nasty cold.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd be out and I'd be trying, I'd have my little GoPro, and that thing, it was very sensitive to the cold. And, in no time flat, you're out of power, and then I'm charging and getting, all the rest. But so I was listening to the people. I wanted to hear their stories, and I wanted to know why it was they were there. And so some of the stories I heard were just extraordinary. And a number of them I've referenced in the book. But people who, lost their jobs over the pandemic, lost their houses, and then lost their marriages. And this is what one trucker shared with me. And it's like, you know what? This is painful. Like, I mean, this is, and if you remember that time, it was like, it was all kinds of tension in families. In my family, I mean, I was like, myself and my father were the only two that weren't vaccinated. And maybe they say the chip doesn't go too far from the block. Well, that may have been me. But, there is this, so I wanted to get into it. And then so throughout the book, I look at all the various aspects. I call it 16 ways. I actually was starting out with 20, and then the book just got too big. And so I cut it back. And, but, so I'm looking at the, whether it was the banking sector, the medical sector, the media, you name it. I address them. And basically, it's kind of, in some ways, as I look back at the book now, it's almost kind of like a bit of a ongoing history of what we went through, and then making some challenging observations with respect to government and how government overreacted. And it was one of the books, like, I've done a lot of academic writing. I'd done a lot of books on, freedom of religion and so forth. And, but this was the first time I really done something that was kind of more of a what will I say? And a contemporary book dealing with contemporary issues that were, while yes, my academic work would be contemporary too, but it was more for the general public rather than the academic. And yet at the same time, I found myself wanting to footnote just about everything, because I tried to keep thinking about, okay, someone's going to say, well, where did he get that idea from? And that kind of thing. And so anyhow, so that was it. And I tried to be real with it. And I spent a lot of time. It was like a year and a half writing. I was like, because it was so controversial, I almost didn't even publish it, because I was like, do I really want to take a stand on this? And then I said, okay, you know what? I've got too much into it. I got to put it out there. I don't know if I mentioned on this book, but maybe on another book I wrote. But Churchill has a great line where he says, at first, a book is an idea, and then it becomes this and becomes that. It becomes a mistress, and then it becomes a monster. And just when you're slayed a monster, you fling it to the public. Well, that's kind of like me with this project.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. I wanted to congratulate you on writing the book. Obviously, a ton of work into it, over 300 pages long. But you've captured the essence that I got in reading it, where you said, I went to the people and I listened to the people. And that comes through in this. And so point of disclosure, I got vaccinated. I thought I was protecting my elderly patients at the time. I was in active clinical practice. And I got vaccinated. I didn't get it for myself. I didn't think that I was being protected, but certainly that sounds too self-congratulatory. Maybe I did get it so I could go to restaurants. I don't know, but that's initially why I got it. But I was on record multiple times on the media writing op-eds. I was part of the COVID Misery Index at Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where we looked at policy approaches around the world and we critiqued Canadian approaches. But my core issue with all of this was, again, right back to the individual people, individual patients. You can't use force. I cannot force you to stop smoking. I can't force you to stop drinking. I definitely can't force you to take a vaccine. I have to figure out what you're thinking. Where are you at? And I said this on the radio many times. I said, there's no way you can get someone to change their behavior by using force. And I said, this is very dangerous. You are now asking me to compromise decades-long relationships by saying that you must get vaccinated. And so when my patients asked me, well, should I get vaccinated? I would say, public health has informed me to blah, 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 blah. I would just verbatim repeat what public health said, because we had been warned by our licensing authority that you're going to get in trouble if you don't say what public health tells you to say. So I followed the letter of the law. I wasn't going to lose my job over this. But my patients could see, okay, wait a second, Shawn, you never talk like that to us. You always say these are the pros and cons. And they would expect me to talk that way and say, well, what's the likelihood of me dying as a healthy 18-year-old who is a fitness nut? Yeah. And I would give them the numbers, and then I would say, however, public health informs me to tell you to take the vaccine. It was, we've set ourselves back a generation, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. The medical profession has totally lost tremendous amounts of credibility, not only the medical profession, but even government itself. Yeah. And this is why I say this matter, like the whole convoy, it's for the long haul. Like this is something that the whole debate, what went on, and the willingness of these average people to say enough is enough, government, we're done, is kind of like the touchstone where lots of you'll hear it. I hear it all the time in various people talking, and they'll reference the convoy. Now, some in the media will reference it as he's a convoy supporter. He's not, you know. And then then freedom becomes freedom, as in stupid. But the reality is that very point that you just explained, that is the principle of the inviolability of the person.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And it's the inviolability of the person in the medical profession. It's the inviolability of the person in the legal profession. It's the inviolability of the person in the policing profession. It's in all of the professions.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Important.
So I better learn how to pronounce it then. Inviolability of the person. Inviolability. I'll practice it. We just say autonomy. That's all we say. The last question I ask everybody is, what have I not asked you that I should be asking you? What keeps you awake at night? What are you worried about for Canada? So what have I not asked you that you wished I would have asked you about?
I think the COVID experience was a precursor to where we're headed with artificial intelligence. I think we're going to soon, at the rate that we're going. I just saw yesterday on Twitter, on X, that Musk said that his robot that he's developing within 3 years is going to outperform any surgeon on the planet. We have no idea what's coming and how all of the artificial intelligence, the robotic scheme, and so on is going to totally change the whole concept of freedom and first freedoms. So that's one. The other thing is, I think the geopolitical world right now is totally changing, and it is also changing in part because of the advances of AI. If you read any of the accounts of how the Americans went in and took out Maduro, one report I read that there was something like 1,000 soldiers were protecting him, but yet a small group of Americans were able to go in and get him back on the aircraft carrier and then back into New York in no time. There has been some developments that's been going on in the weaponization of artificial intelligence and other weapons that literally it has something to do with the whole sonic weaponry that's going on. This world has changed dramatically over the last number of years as we see the advancement of this. What does that mean? What does that mean for our freedoms when we're going to be so, you talk about loss of privacy. I mean, we voluntarily gave up our privacy with Facebook and everything else. But we're now moving into a rapid ascent of government control of our identities, of our movements. And now soon when they bring in the digital, now, it almost sounds like one could be, it's not conspiracy anymore. It's like Bruce Pardy says, the conspiracy theorists have become the perceptive pundits. But the amount of control that government is going to have on where we spend our money, where we travel, what we are to do, and now with Bill C-9, what the definition of hate is, as determined by the bureaucrats, it's totally changing the landscape of freedom, of the ability. One of the things that I've recently became aware of is the fact that in Ontario right now, there's a culling of books throughout the schools. In one school in London, 10,000 volumes have been destroyed. I had a wonderful conversation with a librarian who's very concerned about the censorship and the lack of resources. When we have our instrument of choice today, right here, this is to me the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This can be manipulated so much. And
just for listeners, he's holding up his cell phone.
Yeah, I'm holding up the cell phone right here.
There you go.
And the librarian says that anything that's just limited to digital is subject to editing. So it is not beyond the realm of possibility that authorities will one day say, and they're already culling out a lot of the, according to this librarian, a lot of literature that are seen to be unacceptable in today's age. Who's to say that eventually we'll have the Orwellian example of the Winstons in whether it's through AI or whether it's actual persons who are going to change the entire literature, the entire canon through digital mechanisms, which could be done probably relatively quickly. So those are the kinds of things that I think about a fair bit.
Yes. And I don't know how you sleep at all thinking about that, but I wanted to jump in. You're mentioning about the digital control. So my daughter, she's going, all my kids are in their 20s. I have 4 kids. And my youngest has been exploring whether or not she can go use a dumb phone, get rid of her smartphone. And really you can't almost nowadays, but she told me this, and I didn't know this existed. She said, now a lot of printers that you buy for your computer will only work if you maintain a subscription, and certain luxury cars will only perform a certain way if you maintain a subscription. So they'll only go over a certain speed if you pay to unlock that feature. And even tractors, farm tractors, they're developing, I don't know if they're for sale now, but this is all part of the auto industry even, to have to force you to have a digital subscription to make sure that your tractor continues to function the way you want it to be. Well, to your point, that gives the subscription holder the right to stop your subscription, or for whatever reason your payment doesn't go through. Well, now your car doesn't go any faster than 5 miles an hour. So this isn't conspiracy theory. It's actually reality. It's right there. And that's why I keep buying physical books, like your book. Yeah, we got to buy physical books and
totally,
stack them up.
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely essential. I am absolutely convinced that we need to have the physical copies. Bradbury's 451 Fahrenheit 451 is to me, we're living it, and I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah. Barry Bussey, thank you so much for making time for us today. I will have links for your book, links for your I don't know about, you don't usually advertise Twitter, but certainly to your website.
Sure.
Thank you for making time today.
My pleasure. You take care.
You too.